Revolution, 1988, Chapter 4. 1988. The decade was roaring on and it seemed like nothing could stop hair metal's momentum. A lot of our 1986 champs were coming back for another round in 1988. Europe, Stryper, Bon Jovi, and the highly anticipated second albums from Cinderella and Poison. Both dialed down their image and integrated some elements of the blues in there, Cinderella more than Poison on both of those. While they were dialing down the look, Britney Fox were cranking it up. Hairspray, makeup, and puffy shirts, the 1700s touches in the look was something dreamed up by singer Dizzy Dean Davidson to coincide with the name of one of his old ancestors named, you guessed it, Britney Fox. I saw this outrageous look on the album cover in the record store and bought it without ever hearing them. Shortly after, they would be all over MTV. Having guitarist Michael Kelly Smith be a Cinderella alumni brought some comparisons, but I thought they had their own unique sound. While most bands were trying to out-shred each other and be totally 80s, Britney Fox wore their 70s influence on their shiny purple sleeves. I was majorly impressed with the songwriting skills and the split personality voice of Davidson. I got the honor to talk with some of the original members on the podcast. Here's Michael Kelly Smith. Quote, since we came out in the later 80s, people thought we were just another 80s band. With us, we had to have our influences from somewhere. It was evident that the 70s is where those influences were going to come from. In our case, we all grew up with Kiss and Aerosmith, Nazareth, Sweet, Zeppelin, Montrose, you name it. Those sounds really came through because all of us were influenced by the same bands. For the vocals, Dean had the ability to sing in a lower clean register or a higher screaming register. He was able to do both really well. It was an attribute for us because he sounded like two different singers. We got two for the price of one. Coming out of Cinderella, it was luck finding someone who could do what Dean could do. We were super fortunate to have him around when he was. End quote. Here's Johnny D. I think at that time, bands just needed something to set them apart from the other bands. We did just enough with the look to get people to notice and get listening. So we achieved that, but it also bit us in the ass sometimes as well. For the debut, we didn't have much of a budget to go overboard, so we kept it as raw as possible. Britney pretty much had their shit together with the songs and the image before getting signed, so there weren't really many changes a label or producer needed to make. The songs were simple, kick-ass anthems. We had a producer that really wasn't even a big name, so he came in within our budget and put it out, and people dug it. End quote. Speaking of buying albums without hearing the band, it would have to be a necessity for these guys.
Fighting the world every single day. Fighting the world for the right to play.
There was no way you were catching these metal warriors on radio or MTV. Okay, maybe they played the Blow Your Speakers video twice. I'm talking about Manowar. Yes, I know Manowar isn't hair metal or glam metal. Well, take a look at their 1988 photo shoot with David Schenkel and get back to me. There it was. It was like someone repainted Destroyer and threw on some heavy metal Masters of the Universe. Remember, I told you I was into He-Man. I needed this. As usual, my random purchase paid off. Fortunately, I missed the loincloth era of the band, but unfortunately, they were now in a Speedo and chaps phase. Manowar wasn't as heavy as I thought they would be. They weren't thrash, they were just straight up heavy metal, sometimes verging on hard rock. The musicianship of Joey DeMaio, Ross the Boss, and Scott Columbus was intense and off the charts. But the element that was most powerful and mind-blowing was the voice of singer Eric Adams. A distinct vocalist who could sing super high, jumping from softer tones to metallic raspy ones effortlessly. Not long after buying Fighting the World, the epic Kings of Metal was released. I think this album blew my mind even more. I loved how upfront the bass was and how it actually soloed in Sting of the Bumblebee. Seems like I would keep finding early Manowar albums that I never knew existed at used music shops. Of course I bought them. I talked with former guitarist Ross the Boss on the Metalcast on why they never broke in the US and his exit from the band. Quote, Joey and I really liked the cover for Destroyer by Kiss. We wanted to be represented larger than life like they were. That's what we wanted and that's what we got. I have tons of respect for Gene and Paul. For us not being bigger than we were, it was the times. The time for us to make it in America would have been before Fighting the World, with the first few records when we had an actual buzz around us. The problem was we didn't go out and play enough. Joey was so worried about all the gear and the spectacle, we needed to get in a small trailer and play anywhere and everywhere we could every night. That's what all the other bands were doing. Technology was really catching up, though, for the recordings. Fighting the World was the first digital metal record ever, and we improved on it with Kings of Metal. When the record was done, I was fired before it was released. The worst timing that's ever been. The worst decision in rock and roll history. I was gone, and it set the whole thing's axis off. To replace me with anyone else was a serious mistake." End quote. More bands were hitting the scene with debut albums in 1988. Three of my favorites were Winger, LA Guns, and Roxgang. Here's what Winger rhythm guitarist, keyboardist Paul Taylor thought about their debut. Quote, "The debut is probably my favorite out of all the ones we've done. The angst, you're young, and you've got your fingers crossed. At the time we were getting to release it, Kip, Reb, and me all moved into an apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey. I was still playing with Alice Cooper, so I was flying in and out. Rod they had met at the last minute. So Rod Morgenstein had cut his drums and was part of the band. I never actually met him until the album was completely finished. We all had never played one gig together, and we ended up opening for the Scorpions for a month. We had to get it together really quick." End quote. Producer Bo Hill still thinks highly of the talent in Winger as well. Quote, "The strongest players at every position is in Winger, and I've worked with some of the greatest guitar players and drummers in the world. Vocally, Kip would be at the top of my list as well. So for sheer musical brainpower, it would have to be the guys in Winger." End quote. I'll never forget walking through the small mall in my hometown and seeing posters in the record store window of LA Guns. It was that sweet black and white picture from inside the album where they were all holding guns and ammo. Here's LA Guns, who I always liked better than GNR singer Phil Lewis, on coming into the band late for their 1988 debut album. Quote, "First album I consider to be a bit of a salvage project. Tracy, in one form or another, had been playing under the LA Guns name since 1984. He had accumulated a lot of songs and a lot of ideas. With the singer before me, they had done some recordings and quite a lot of writing. Certain songs were already written and recorded with the other singer. It wasn't that I didn't want to sing the stuff he did. I couldn't understand what he was singing. I'd slow down the cassette and all I could hear was this weird mumbling. I certainly didn't want that. If there were fantastic lyrics and good songs, that would be one thing. I wouldn't have touched them if I didn't think I could make it better." End quote. Roxgang released Things You've Never Done Before in 1988. A glam metal masterpiece that featured one of my favorites from the genre, No Easy Way Out. Singer Kevin Steele had a lot to say when we spoke. Quote, "Had we been signed a year or two earlier, it would have worked out better. We were dirt poor and we didn't have the money to move to California. We would have been platinum if we were signed a year earlier. People probably thought we were getting on the bandwagon late, but in reality, Roxgang was together for years playing locally. We were playing before anybody knew Poison or Motley Crue nationally. People in Florida bars thought we were transvestite junkies. Once that stuff got big, people realized we were ahead of our time. I felt my songs like Red Rose, Fastest Gun in Town, Ball and Chain weren't like Girls, 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 Cherry Pie, or Down Boys. I never really associated us with a lot of those bands that came out when we did. I had no particular kinship to them." End quote. I asked him about working with producer Bo Hill. Quote, "Bo Hill is a great guy. Virgin didn't know what to do with us. They had tons of money and got us everything we wanted. They let us pick our producer, and Bo Hill was on the top. We were big fans of the band Kix, and Bo had just produced their recent release. He worked with Rat, Alice Cooper, and of course Winger and Warrant, who we weren't crazy about musically. He was the only producer we worked with that had constructive ideas that I actually agreed with. Just a super cool, funny guy. It was my best experience in the studio." End quote. He also made mention of LA Guns stealing one of his video ideas. Quote, "Talk about the backstabbing that goes on behind the scenes. Our second video, Scratch My Back, was produced by an English cat named Ralph Zyman. Roxgang went to England to tour, so I was hanging out with Ralph. I tell him I have this great idea for our next video, Red Rose, which was never made. I want to be standing on a porch of this old southern mansion and have rose petals to be raining down on me. He goes and makes Ballad of Jane for LA Guns. He swiped my idea, man." End quote. Kiss, Animalize Uncensored. Since I wasn't getting to a Kiss show right away, there had to be another way I could see their epic show in full. There was. One day I walked through our local grocery store, which also had video rentals, and there it was. I rented it for the weekend, and my buddy slept over, and we were going to stay up late and watch it. Detroit Rock City had them together in the back of the stage, raising their arms in unison after each power chord. Damn, Kiss always knew how to make an entrance. This place looks like a damn zoo. The songs were played at light speed and the band was running across the stage like track stars. Paul's voice was in top form. Eric's drumming was just amazing as well. I thought Bruce fit in perfect as the new guy. And yes, I know Gene's wig sucked, but I kind of thought he looked cool. How about that killer bass solo thing that he does on there? So catchy. Gene's hair was something that confused the hell out of me in the 80s. In some music videos, he would have giant poofy hair. Then you'd see him in interviews or at an award show, and it was kind of long hair but pretty thin with no bangs at all. I stand by that the wig just wasn't for Animalize because he was in the movie Runaway. I say he wore wigs and hair pieces or extensions throughout the whole decade. Okay, so I look over at my buddy and he fell asleep. So I try to wake him up because Rock and Roll Night was coming on. He pops up at me and he says, Swashu-san. What? He says it again, Swashu-san. Dude, what the hell are you talking about? Finally, he snaps out of it and officially wakes up and has no recollection of what he said. I thought it was the funniest shit ever, and I still talk about it to this day. Sometime in this year, maybe it was for my birthday, I got an electric guitar. Just a no-name white Strat. I was ready to be a rock star. I was trying to learn on my own, and it wasn't really going anywhere. But it was fun to pose with the guitar in my full-length mirror. I was a poser. There was this one pose that I saw Gene Simmons do where he flipped the bass upside down, putting the headstock on the floor and his arms on the bottom of the bass's body. Yeah, I think I'll try that. Well, wouldn't you know, the guitar fell and the headstock broke off. Well, that didn't go over well. My dad was able to rig it back on, but it wasn't really right after that. I was told they would never buy me another musical instrument again. But would that stop me? Every band that had to follow up a successful album surely felt the pressure to replicate that success. Once you get on top, you want to stay there. I was a big fan of Stryper's To Hell with the Devil, and I thought In God We Trust was a great follow-up. One thing I noticed is how similarly structured they were. Both started with the title track, second song was the first single, and the fourth track was the ballad. You get the picture. I asked Michael Sweet about this. Quote, it was conscious. Part of it was just wanting to do it that way, and also there was some pressure from the label to do a repeat of To Hell with the Devil because it was so successful. It was hugely successful. So in my subconscious as a writer, I was just thinking that way. That's why the song structure is similar, and that's why the sequence is similar. There's a lot of similarities between those two albums, but there are definitely some differences in the production. In God We Trust is much more polished and perfected. We took longer doing it. More overdubs, bigger and better was the mentality. You don't always get that in the end result, though. To Hell with the Devil is more raw, and I prefer that. End quote. Ultimately, playing it so safe didn't work. In God We Trust had some success, but only sold about half of what To Hell with the Devil did. Hey, did I mention that I had the To Hell with the Devil baseball jersey? You always had to explain yourself to adults with a shirt that had the words hell and devil on it. Stryper are against the devil, not for him. Get with the program, people. A band that toured with Stryper in 1988 was Hurricane. I always thought vocalist Kelly Hansen had an amazing voice, and I think Mick Jones from Foreigner thought that as well. It was also cool to see Tony Cavazzo on bass and Robert Sarzo on guitar. They were both brothers of Quiet Riot members doing their own thing. I was big into 1988's Over the Edge. I got to talk with Robert Sarzo about the album and why he left the band. Quote, I like that record, but I think we lost a bit of the edge. I would have liked some more aggressiveness, but I get the direction that Bob Ezrin was looking for. It's got a lot of great songs on it. He was great to work with, very creative. The one song I wish we released was Give Me an Inch. It's so catchy and I love the harmonies. Bob brought in I'm On To You at the end. He co-wrote that with a guy named Jeff Jones. I like that one. It's very straightforward, but different than something we would write. After that album and tour, things started going in a different direction. Changes started happening in the group with the record company and the management. We played like 300 days a year together. Just caught up to everybody. It wasn't fun anymore. End quote. Yngwie Malmsteen. Okay, what kind of rock star name was that? How do you even pronounce it? Why didn't the guy change his name to Mickey Malmsteen or something? Somewhere along the way I started buying his albums like Marching Out and Trilogy. Why did the guy have a different singer for every album? He wasn't hard to work with or anything, right? There were all these questions going on in my young mind. I really did like his style, even though I wasn't a fan of instrumental guitar. Something about that medieval, neoclassical pop metal with soaring vocals was really hitting home for me. Here in 1988, he had a new singer and album, Odyssey, with Joe Lynn Turner. I knew this guy. He had an awesome voice. He sang on a rainbow tape that I had. It was a great fit and definitely Malmsteen's best album yet. Heaven Tonight was a bona fide classic. I had the great honor of talking to Joe Lynn Turner and longtime drummer Anders Johansson on the podcast. Here's Joe Lynn Turner. Quote, I think it's some of the best work Yngwie or I have ever done. I think it's a brilliant album. It still stands the test of time. Odyssey is just powerful. Every track is a great song with incredible virtuoso playing by Yngwie. My vocal performances? I couldn't get better if I tried. The writing, everything was just there in that package. I know for a fact numerically, it's the biggest album he's ever had. The pairing of us came out of Polygram. That was his label at the time, and I had been on Polygram Polydor with Rainbow. Jim Lewis, who was the VP up there, said he wanted me to do for Yngwie what I did for Rainbow, and that was to write him some hits. I listened to some of his tracks, and I knew I could really make some cool stuff out of it. Heaven Tonight, for example, was a big smash that had the stuff for radio. We kept the integrity, the heaviness, and the subject matter. We came up with a pretty commercial album. We did very well with it, and we toured for it. I thank Polygram for that. All my dealings for that album came through Polygram, not Yngwie. End quote. Joe shared with me an all-star band idea that almost happened, but Yngwie's ego got in the way. Quote, Yngwie was screaming that he had to be the only one on the cover, screaming that it had to include his name, screaming because we were supposed to have Bob Daisley from Ozzy on bass and Eric Singer from Black Sabbath and Kiss on drums. We had meetings with these guys, but Yngwie freaked out. He felt like he was losing control instead of gaining a band. He turned it down. He screamed and yelled until the label gave in. End quote. Here's Anders Johansson. Quote, when we did the album with Joe Lynn Turner, Yngwie did a lot of compromising. I don't think he liked it. He thought it was too commercial. Then again, it was one of his best-selling albums. It was the label that wanted him to be more commercial. Yngwie wanted to do more stuff like the first album, more progressive and fusion. The label wanted the new Bon Jovi. They wanted to make money, but nobody in the band really wanted to play that style. We also didn't want to create bad vibes with the label. They almost threatened us to be more commercial or they wouldn't even support the album. When Joe came, he wanted even more pop songs. We compromised and put some of the fast stuff on there to balance it out. I think it came out great, and that's the one that most people like the best. The label also wanted an all-star band for that one. They wanted to bring in Bob Daisley and Eric Singer. They didn't like that we spoke Swedish. Once Joe was in, they really wanted to create an American band. They really couldn't get rid of my brother because there wasn't a better keyboard player out there. For drums, I'm sure Eric Singer could have pulled it off. I talked to him before, and he said he had no interest really in doing it. He said the stuff was too fast for him. He ended up with Kiss, so I think he did okay. Bob Daisley was in the band for a short while. We actually rehearsed with him. Yngwie didn't think he played fast enough either. End quote. Magazines. Our metal heroes were gracing the covers and insides monthly of Rip, Faces, Hit Parader, and Metal Edge, to just name a few. I always thought Metal Edge was the best. Editor Jerry Miller did great interviews, and the Metal Wire was probably the only place I was going to know what was going on with my bands, like Keel and Tiger Tails. There was a small store in my hometown that sold newspapers and magazines. My friends and I would just hit it up after school. Sometimes we would buy, but we mostly just looked. Eventually they put up a sign that said, "These magazines are for buying, not browsing." Was this aimed at us? Come on, we were great customers. We would read the magazines and then go buy some 25-cent candy. In our minds, we were even. Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime.
Operation Mindcrime. We're an underground revolution working on
Thinking man's metal was sneaking into the mainstream. My young mind was digging it and actually understanding it. I understood it because Queensryche did a great job of inserting cinematic narration in between the songs to help tell the story. Their videos showed us what the characters look like and helped push the concept forward. Songs like Eyes of a Stranger and I Don't Believe in Love were great and could be enjoyed whether you knew they were part of a concept album or not. This was the first concept album I ever heard. I can say today it's the best one I've ever heard. Oh, and the BMG Tape Club might have been cheap, but they always ruined the side label. The originals were always so much better. Anyways, I got to talk with the man behind this epic album, former vocalist Jeff Tate. Quote, quite a bit of it was inspired by people I knew and had met at the time in the mid-'80s while I was living in Montreal. It was a real interesting time. There was a lot of political unrest. There was a very powerful group that was trying to force the Canadian government to secede from the Union of Canada. It was pretty amazing to be witness to all of that. When I brought my idea into the band, there was a lot of pushback. My writing partner, Chris DeGarmo, got it right away. He really jumped in and supported the idea. Him and I pretty much took the reins of the project. Eventually, the rest of the guys got on board once they could see what was going on. End quote. Queensryche reminds me to mention Queen. Hey, remember? I had their 45 back in 1980. At some point, I bought their greatest hits. My mom enjoyed this tape, and we would play it in the car a lot of days before she took me to school. I only mention this because metal bands that I would start incorporating Queen elements into their music, and I would just love it when they did. By the time Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits came out, I had all the Kiss albums, and they were officially now my favorite band. So I needed to get Smashes for those two epic new tracks. When certain albums were released, like Dynasty and Unmasked, they definitely brought some discontent among the hardcore fans. Picking these up almost 10 years later was much different. It was just another old Kiss album, and they all sounded good to me. My best friend and I even pooled together our money and bought the Japanese vinyl import of The Elder. Obviously, Kiss kept getting more commercially conscious throughout their run with the original lineup. By the time Creatures came out, they knew they needed to be a full-blown metal band. My walls were now plastered with old and new Kiss posters. With their renewed popularity, makeup posters from Destroyer and Creatures were readily available. My stonewashed jean jacket explained where I was at musically perfectly. It had the 4 solo album patches on the front and a Destroyer patch on the back. Hey, speaking of Kiss, wasn't their original guitarist back on the scene? Ace Frehley had finally made it back to music with Frehley's Comet in 1987. In 1988, the band consisting of Ace, John Regan, Jamie Oldacre, and Todd Hallworth took the name Frehley's Comet and released Second Sighting. I thought their first single, Insane, was an Ace classic. I love Second Sighting, and I thought Todd was a great talent. Many fans, though, were unhappy seeing more of his material on there than the previous album. I asked Todd about this very thing on the podcast. Here's Todd. Quote, Second Sighting was kind of rushed in an effort to keep the momentum going. Ace had bronchitis early on working on it, and he didn't have a lot of songs written. I was a madman writing songs all the time, so Ace was gracious enough to say, let's put Todd's songs on there. It could have gone better, but it could have gone a lot worse. End quote. I asked why he was out of the band for the Trouble Walking album. Quote, the truth is, for the next album, the label wanted Ace to write and sing everything. That left me with nothing to do and nothing to earn. It wasn't my record deal, it was Ace's. So if I'm not singing and showcasing myself, it's basically a slap in the face and puts me in the background again. I had had enough of that. I called Ace and I told him I had to bow out. He told me he didn't want me to leave. I figured I had to take a gamble and go out on my own. End quote. Let's finish off with an oddball album that confuses the hell out of people that I love. Ugh. Cold Lake by Celtic Frost. Celtic Frost were an avant-garde black metal band that went glam thrash in 1988. I like glam and thrash, so it made sense to me. Band leader Tom Warrior constantly wore an LA Gun shirt during this time, so he was cool in my book. There was quite a lot of backlash from their fans, and today he tries to forget this album ever happened. Cold Lake lead guitarist Oliver Amberg came on the show to discuss this misunderstood gem. Quote, the image didn't help the album at all. If you'd seen us later on the tour, we looked like a different band. It wasn't the smartest move having pictures like that. There was a lack of heaviness with the production as well. It was too polished and lacked some aggression. I don't think people were ready and they weren't forgiving about the image we had then. There's a lot of hate going on still 30 years later, which puzzles me. There's some people who like it and some that don't, but I like it. When you just look at the songs and the riffs and forget about the production and some of the lyrics, it's quite a heavy album. I think there were some words like sleazy. People were like, ooh, that's a word Celtic Frost shouldn't use. Some people live with it and some people still hate it. We were a 4-piece band. It wasn't just me writing the songs, it was teamwork. We had a lot of fun making this record, especially in the beginning when the songwriting was going on. We had a lot of laughs and good times. Then it just didn't turn out how everybody expected. There became a lot of anger and frustration for everybody involved with the band. Things were okay, and then it changed. I won't apologize to some people who think I'm a dirtbag. After 30 years, I'm free of charge now. They shouldn't blame me anymore. Now it's like that forbidden album. You can't get it anymore. You can't stream it. It's gone. I think it's only Tom's decision. It's his baby. If he doesn't want it anymore, so be it. End quote. I asked him why bassist Kurt Victor Bryant's pants were unzipped on the back cover. Quote, his pants being unzipped was an accident. His pants just got broken and we didn't have spare pants. In our craziness back then, we were like, let's just do it. The photographer was there and there was no shops open. Now I look at it and I don't think it's very cool. End quote. I asked him why he was gone after Cold Lake. Quote, it was a pain in the ass to work with me for Tom. I was a young guy who had a record contract. I toured and I was just behaving like a prick. I thought I was a rock star and a king. That was pretty heavy for the other guys to deal with, especially Tom. There was my attitude and some of the abuse stuff. I was a mess back then. If I had the wisdom that I have now, things would have turned out so differently. I wasn't focused on the music like Tom was. Celtic Frost was his life. I was focused on playing live and having a party. It's sad, actually. End quote.